The fact that James McRyland Curry is a tragedy is made obvious by how much of a tragedy it is, and no one will speak out about it. To make it fairly simple, I've been subject to a stick-up by museum thieves masquerading as um, social idealists, and I have been tortured, brutally injured and harmed, robbed of a life in a crime that conspicuously implicates kinship lines, as well as a union society in Pittsburgh. The way that the government and the administration and the media explain it and fob it away on behalf of the stick-up artists, the way the police fob it away, is a simple special relationship with Israel, whereby a Jewish girl complains about an Irish deaf man, no matter how insidiously and wrong-headed it might be, where even the minimum justified slut shaming copiously applies, and no harm was done to her. The white is ruined all the same. This is a function of the special relationship. The way that the schools process it is with spinner beanies on their hats. They emoji themselves intellectual giants. When it comes to the problems of the world, it seems fairly clear to me that the arms race was put together by celebrity superstate personality cults, would-be dictators like Reagan, to create an arms race for the maintaining of a status quo where poverty and misfortune cannot be engaged constructively without yourself suffering loss and privation. And the way that they enforce this situation, which feeds into the categorical feedback from charitable groups that have long been in place and sustained during these situations, particularly Christianity and religious groups of this nature, who covertly accept and advocate for the status quo of the arms race, in part because it makes them giants of the profession of philanthropy, is to study the mind of a person who believes in the ethics of virtue, but is unable to practice them because of personal privation or other priorities. In my case, they made me an object lesson in pornographic genocide and illegally taped me and illegally put my house under experimental lab rat surveillance, which continues. And they said, well, it's very simple, queer ball. All you have to do is accept being made a eunuch and abandon sexual pleasures, and you will escape the fate of the AIDS attack. But they failed to point out that it doesn't address that AIDS was an attack, and that the leverage of their argument was the parochial smoke and steam that was the fingerprint of the attack. In other words, if you don't let us get away with it, you die. Behind this, rather sadly, was the NAACP. What happens when faced with the problems of the world, a person who's not in a position of power? It's, for one thing, you regionalize. You say, do I help the homeless veterans? Do I help the Africans in sustainable development goals with the UN? Do I help the poor Ukrainians being attacked? What do I do with this extra quarter? Do I just go play pinball since it's not going to help anybody? And this leads to Seattle's vicious expertise in exploiting a victim of torture and brutality and serial exploitation, a tragedy that is all the more made a tragedy by the fact that no one will identify it as a tragedy. And that is that they create a new defamation. It's not a defamation. They burned out the claim that it's a white. It's not a defamation. Deafness isn't a defamation they can use, but the white parochial says you're lucky you have that to the tragic object. In other words, it's a bargaining position. Glaucoma, we only took one of your eyes for now. Seattle, in their genius, resort to something I call shelterization. They say, you're sheltered. You have things you don't deserve. And has to do with being granted certain forms of access as one of the unwanted and poor. Because the backstabbers in the rock industry and the allied to the arms race status quo and similar types in the NAACP see licky jobs in fight clubs of poor on poor dogfights, and they can't get enough of them. Seattle is a sick, sick place. It is as bad as Pittsburgh. And the left can't get enough of helping the extreme right wing. The left will do dirty to the victims of the right wing like no tomorrow. And they get away with it with this new defamation, which is to shelterize the person. You are sheltered. And it's extremely sad when you're faced with the claim that the overarching goal of all consideration in policy should be to avoid nuclear war. Really, I think that gives people like Trump the upper hand. What we should be doing is making it impossible for anybody to blackmail us with nuclear war. And the way to do that is to come to consensus in cooperation in the de-escalation of nuclear development and the abolition of the arms race status quo in favor of engagement so that the unwanted cease to be unwanted and the poor cease to be pariahs, vulnerable to the licky chops left, destroying anything that's left after the right wing is finished.